Close your eyes for a moment and imagine London after dark, long before electricity makes the night feel optional. The sun has slipped away, the sky is heavy and black, and yet the city does not sleep. Not really. What I want to walk you through tonight is a London that most people never picture, a city where night is not an absence of life, but a different shift entirely. A place where work, danger, intimacy, and survival all intensify once daylight loosens its grip. When I first started digging into this side of London's past, what struck me wasn't how quiet it became, but how organized, how purposeful, and how necessary the night really was. This is the London that functioned while most respectable households locked their doors, banked their fires, and hoped the darkness would pass without incident. If you're here with me for the long haul, now is the moment to hit subscribe, because this channel is built for people who want to go deeper than surface history, and I don't want you missing where this story goes next. And while you're here, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from, city, town, country, wherever you are. I read those, and it genuinely helps me picture how far these nighttime streets are stretching. Once the sun went down in early modern London, the city didn't simply dim, it transformed. Darkness reshaped behavior, it sharpened fears, but it also created opportunity. In a world without reliable street lighting until well into the 18th century, night was something you navigated carefully. Torches, oil lamps, candles, and the occasional moon were all you had, and they were expensive, unreliable, and fragile. Light itself became a kind of currency. Households rationed it, businesses depended on it, and entire professions revolved around controlling it. Yet, despite the obstacles, London needed the night to function. Goods had to move, fires had to be watched, streets had to be guarded, bodies had to be carried, and information had to circulate before dawn. Daylight alone could not support a city of this size. What surprises many people is just how busy London could be after dark. Certain kinds of work actually preferred the night. Brewers, for instance, often laboured through the late hours, timing their processes to avoid the heat of day. Bakers were already at work long before sunrise, kneading dough and stoking ovens so bread could be ready by morning. In the markets, porters prepared loads in the small hours, taking advantage of quieter streets to move heavy goods that would be nearly impossible to transport once the daytime crowds returned. The night shift wasn't a marginal group, it was essential. Without it, the city would choke on its own size. Then there were the watchmen. If there's one figure who embodies nighttime London, it's them. Officially tasked with keeping order, watching for fires, and challenging suspicious strangers, the watch was a patchwork system that evolved over centuries. These were not professional police in the modern sense. Many were elderly men, hired cheaply, often mocked in contemporary writing as slow, sleepy, or easily bribed. And yet, for all the jokes, the watch formed a visible structure of authority in the darkness. Their calls echoed through the streets, marking time, weather, and vigilance. Past 12 o'clock, and a cold, frosty morning, they would cry, reminding sleepless Londoners that someone, at least in theory, was awake and watching. Fire was the constant terror of the night. Without sunlight, a small flame could become a catastrophe before anyone noticed. Candles tipped, hearths flared, sparks leapt from one timber building to another. That's why nighttime vigilance mattered so much. Watchmen, householders, and night workers all shared an unspoken responsibility to stay alert. Buckets were kept ready. Parish engines stood by. Church bells waited to be rung in alarm. The memory of earlier infernos never fully faded, and darkness made every flicker feel dangerous. At night, London lived with one eye open, but night also offered cover. Crime thrived in the shadows, and Londoners knew it. Muggings, burglaries, assaults and robberies were more likely once darkness fell. The narrow streets, uneven paving and twisting alleys gave attackers every advantage. You learned quickly where not to walk, how fast to move, and who to avoid. Respectable people planned their evenings carefully, often hiring link boys to light the way. These boys, carrying flaming torches, guided clients through the dark for a small fee. They were both protectors and potential threats, sometimes accused of colluding with thieves or leading customers into danger. Trust at night was always provisional. Yet the night was not only about fear. It was also about connection. Taverns and alehouses glowed with warmth and noise after sunset. For many working Londoners, this was their social world. Stories were shared, deals struck, songs sung, arguments settled, and alliances formed. These places blurred the boundary between work and leisure. A dock labourer might finish a shift at dusk and spend hours exchanging news with sailors just arrived from distant ports. Information moved fastest at night, passed from mouth to mouth over mugs of beer. By morning, rumours had hardened into accepted truth. Some professions belonged almost entirely to the night. Surgeons and physicians, for instance, were often summoned after dark to deal with injuries, illnesses, or sudden deaths. Midwives were called at all hours, guided through unlit streets by memory and instinct. The city's poor relied heavily on nighttime charity too. Church-based relief, informal almsgiving, and neighbourly aid often happened quietly after sunset, away from official scrutiny. The night softened certain social boundaries. It allowed help to be given discreetly and dignity to be preserved. There was also a different emotional register to the night. Loneliness intensified. So did desire. Prostitution was a visible and persistent part of nocturnal London. Sex workers operated openly in certain districts, their presence both condemned and quietly tolerated. Moral reformers complained loudly, but enforcement was inconsistent. The night created a space where official values bent under the weight of economic reality. For many women, this was one of the few ways to survive in a city that offered limited options. Their work was dangerous, stigmatized, and precarious, but it was woven into the nighttime economy all the same. Death, too, worked the night shift. Bodies could not always wait for daylight. Parish officials, bell ringers, and gravediggers were often active after dark, especially during outbreaks of disease or harsh winters. Funerals might be prepared at night to avoid crowds or scrutiny. The boundary between life and death felt thinner in the darkness, and Londoners were acutely aware of it. The sounds of night carried differently. A cry, a bell, a hurried footstep could mean everything or nothing, and you learned to listen carefully. What I find most compelling is how adaptive the city was. Londoners didn't romanticize the night, but they learned to use it. They created routines, rules, and roles that allowed the city to keep breathing while most people slept. Night was not chaos. It was a parallel system, less visible, more fragile, but absolutely vital. And once you start seeing it that way, you realize that daylight London rests on foundations laid in darkness. As we move forward, I want you to keep this image in mind. A city that never truly switches off, only changes tempo. In the next part, we're going to step closer into the streets themselves, into the sounds, the risks, and the small human decisions that defined a single night in London. Every footstep mattered. Every light signalled something, and every hour before dawn carried its own meaning. Picture yourself stepping out into the street sometime after midnight, when the respectable doors are shut and the city feels narrower, as if the darkness has pressed the buildings closer together. The stones underfoot are uneven and slick, not just from rain, but from the day's refuse that hasn't yet been cleared. This is the hour when London reveals how much of it runs on habit rather than instruction. There are no signs telling you where to walk safely, no maps glowing in your hand. You rely on memory, on landmarks you half recognize in low light, and on the sounds that drift toward you. A distant laugh from a tavern, the creak of a cart axle, the measured call of a watchman somewhere down the lane. Night London is navigated as much by ear as by eye. Movement after dark follows a different logic. During the day, the streets are choked with carts, animals and bodies. At night, there's space, but it's uneasy space. Goods that are too bulky or disruptive to move during daylight often travel now. Coal wagons rumble through sleeping neighbourhoods. Brewers' drays shift barrels toward alehouses that will be loud again by morning. Along the river, activity barely slows. The Thames at night is a low, murmuring presence, black water reflecting scattered points of firelight from wharves and boats. Lightermen, ferrymen and dock labourers work by lantern and moon, unloading cargo that has to be ready for markets at first light. The river doesn't care about the hour, and neither do the people whose lives depend on it. What's striking is how many people are awake who are not meant to be visible. Servants move quietly through back streets, running errands for households that want things done before morning without fuss. Messengers carry notes between businesses and officials, sealing deals or passing warnings under cover of darkness. Printers sometimes work late into the night, presses thumping steadily as pamphlets and handbills are produced to be spread. At dawn. The night allows information to leap ahead of the day, to arrive before anyone has time to react. By the time most Londoners wake up, decisions have already been shaped in the dark. Sound behaves differently at night, and Londoners are acutely aware of it. Without the roar of daytime traffic, small noises travel far. A shout can echo down an entire street. Footsteps become announcements. This changes how people act. Thieves learn to move softly. Watchmen learn to listen for rhythms that don't belong. Ordinary residents learn when to open a window and when to stay still. The city becomes a shared acoustic space where everyone's actions leak into everyone else's lives. Silence itself becomes suspicious. Too quiet can mean trouble. The watch, for all its limitations, forms the backbone of nighttime order. Each parish organises its own system, funded locally and unevenly enforced. Some watchmen take their role seriously, patrolling steadily, challenging strangers, checking doors and watching for fire. Others are less reliable, drowsy, drunk or eager to avoid confrontation. Londoners know this and plan accordingly. A well-lit street with an active watch is safer than a dark alley where no one calls the hour. Neighbourhood reputation matters more at night. Certain areas are known as trouble long before you ever step foot in them, and once the sun sets, those reputations harden into warnings. Fire remains the ever-present nightmare. Night magnifies the danger because response times stretch and visibility collapses. Households are expected to manage their own risks. Candles are snuffed carefully. Hearths are banked. Chimneys are checked, at least in theory. But accidents happen, and when they do, the city reacts fast or not at all. The cry of fire cuts through everything. Bells ring. People spill into the streets in their nightclothes, forming bucket chains by instinct. In these moments, the social hierarchy blurs. Wealth doesn't matter if your roof is burning. The night strips London down to cooperation or catastrophe. For women, the night carries its own set of calculations. Respectability is fragile after dark, and being seen in the wrong place at the wrong time can stain a reputation permanently. Yet many women have no choice but to move through the city at night. Domestic servants finish late. Market women rise early and travel before dawn. Midwives and nurses are summoned whenever labour or illness demands. They know the streets intimately, often better than men who only walk them in daylight. Still, the risks are real. Harassment, violence and suspicion follow them. Survival depends on confidence, local knowledge and sometimes sheer defiance. Then there are the children of the night, apprentices running errands, link boys hustling for customers, homeless youths sleeping in doorways or under market stalls. Childhood in London does not pause when the sun goes down. For many, night is when the city loosens its grip just enough to allow small freedoms. A few pennies earned guiding a stranger, a warm corner near a bakery oven, a chance to overhear something valuable. But it's also when exploitation thrives. Night work hardens children early, teaching them which adults are safe and which are not, lessons that linger for life. Crime is not random here. It clusters around opportunity, unlit stretches of road, bottlenecks near bridges, taverns at closing time, when drink has dulled judgment and purses hang loose. Thieves work in groups, watching, signalling, vanishing. Some are violent, many are not. Most are practical. London's court records make it clear that crime at night is often swift and transactional. A blow, a grab, a disappearance into darkness. Victims rarely pursue justice unless the loss is serious. Reporting takes time, costs money, and risks retaliation. The night protects offenders as much as it exposes victims. And yet, not everyone out after dark is desperate or dangerous. Pleasure has its place too. Theatre performances sometimes end late, releasing crowds into the streets, buzzing with conversation and critique. Music spills from taverns. Private gatherings stretch into the early hours, especially among those who can afford candles and servants to manage them. For the elite, night can feel insulated, a controlled environment where darkness is aesthetic rather than threatening. For everyone else, it's rawer, closer to the bone. There's an intimacy to night labour that's easy to overlook. Working while the city sleeps creates a strange sense of ownership. Night workers talk about knowing London in a way others don't. They see its transitions, the moment when noise ebbs and returns, when the sky lightens just enough to promise morning. They notice which houses stir early and which remain dark. Patterns emerge. The city becomes legible. This knowledge is rarely written down, but it's passed from person to person, shift to shift, generation to generation. As dawn approaches, the night begins to loosen its hold. Bakers pull loaves from ovens. Milkmaids move toward the city. Market stalls reappear as if assembled by muscle memory. The last of the night's drinkers stumble home. Watchmen prepare to hand over their posts. What's remarkable is how little ceremony there is in this transition. London doesn't announce the end of night. It simply absorbs it. The labour, the risks, the quiet deals, and the small acts of endurance vanish into daylight, leaving few traces behind. And that's what makes this version of London so easy to forget. The night does its work and then steps aside. But if you pay attention, you start to see how much of the city's rhythm depends on what happens while most people are asleep. In the next part, I want to focus on the people who deliberately choose the night, who shape their identities around it, and who understand its rules better than anyone else. This is where the city's shadows start to feel crowded. There's a certain kind of person who doesn't just endure London at night, but chooses it, builds a life around it, and understands its logic in a way daylight never quite allows. These are the people who stop measuring time by hours and start measuring it by moments, by when the taverns thin out, by when the watch grows less attentive, by when the sky shifts from black to that faint, uncertain grey that signals the city is about to wake. What fascinates me is how deliberately some Londoners step into the dark, not as a last resort, but as a strategy. Night offers fewer rules, fewer witnesses, and sometimes fewer competitors. Take the traders and fixers who operate in the margins of legality. The night is perfect for them. Deals that might raise eyebrows in daylight are concluded quietly after sunset. Goods of questionable origin change hands by lantern light. A crate unloaded at the wrong key. A shipment redirected. A document altered. None of this requires silence, just discretion. The night provides both. These people are not always criminals in the dramatic sense. Many are pragmatists navigating a city where regulation exists on paper but enforcement is uneven. Darkness smooths over the friction between what is allowed and what is necessary. Then there are the entertainers, the ones who make their living by keeping others awake. Musicians, singers, storytellers, actors and performers of every description thrive in the hours after dusk. London's appetite for amusement doesn't vanish at night, it intensifies. Taverns want music. Private gatherings want diversion. Pleasure gardens and informal venues stretch the evening as long as they can. For performers, night means work, but it also means exposure. One good performance can lead to patronage, protection, or at least a warm meal and another booking. Reputation spreads quickly in the dark, passed along by word of mouth before daylight has a chance to dilute it. Night also belongs to those who clean up after the city. This is work almost no one writes about at the time, which is part of why it's so easy to forget. Street sweepers, refuse collectors, and scavengers operate in the hours when they're least likely to be in the way. Human and animal waste has to be moved. Dead animals have to be cleared. Broken goods have to be salvaged or discarded. It's dirty, exhausting labour, and it's done largely out of sight. By morning, the evidence of it is meant to be gone. Daylight London depends on this invisible reset. Some of the most emotionally charged night work happens behind closed doors. Domestic servants are often busiest after sunset, clearing meals, washing dishes, preparing clothes, stoking fires, locking up. For many servants, this is the only time they're alone with their thoughts. The house is quieter. The masters are asleep. The work continues, but the pressure eases just enough to allow reflection. Letters are written by candlelight. Small rebellions happen, quietly. A sip of leftover wine, a stolen moment of rest. Night becomes a pocket of personal time in a life otherwise defined by service. There's also a category of night worker that sits uneasily between necessity and stigma. The people who deal with bodies. Not just the dead, but the injured, the sick, and the dying. Surgeons called out for emergencies. Nurses tending patients through feverish nights. Sextons and gravediggers preparing burials. These jobs require emotional resilience as much as physical stamina. Night compresses everything. Pain feels sharper. Loss feels heavier. Decisions have to be made without consultation. In these moments, London's size doesn't matter. A single room, a single body, becomes the whole world until dawn. For the homeless and the precariously housed, night is the most honest version of the city. There's nowhere to hide from it. Doorways, stairwells, church porches, market stalls, all become temporary refuges. People learn which spots offer warmth, which offer safety, and which invite trouble. Night sharpens the hierarchy among the poor. Those with a few connections, a few coins, or a reliable corner fare better than those with nothing. Survival becomes routine. You sleep lightly. You listen constantly. The city breathes around you, indifferent but predictable if you learn its rhythms. What night also does is flatten certain social distinctions. In daylight, clothing, posture, and entourage signal status. At night, those signals blur. Everyone moves cautiously. Everyone listens. Fear is a great equalizer. A wealthy man without a torch is just as vulnerable as a poor one. A respected official can still be knocked down in a dark alley. This doesn't erase inequality, but it does interrupt it. The night reminds Londoners that the city ultimately belongs to itself, not to any single class. There's a psychological shift that comes with long-term night living. People who work these hours talk differently, think differently, even walk differently. They develop a heightened awareness of their surroundings. They read faces by firelight. They judge intent from tone rather than appearance. Trust is extended cautiously but decisively. You don't have time for prolonged doubt at night. You either move forward or you don't. That decisiveness carries over into other parts of life, shaping personalities in subtle ways. Night also creates its own moral economy. Actions are judged differently when no one is watching. Helping someone after dark carries more weight because it's less performative. Cruelty feels sharper because it's more intimate. People remember who assisted them at night and who turned away. These memories stick. They form informal networks of obligation and loyalty that never appear in records but influence behavior for years. The city's emotional map is drawn in darkness. As the hours wear on, fatigue becomes a character in its own right. Mistakes happen, tempers shorten, judgment slips. This is when accidents occur, when deals go wrong, when violence escalates unexpectedly. Night workers know this and plan for it. They pace themselves. They take turns resting. They rely on routines to carry them through when concentration fades. The city at 3 in the morning is not the same as the city at midnight. Each hour has its own risks. What I always come back to is how intentional all of this is. London doesn't stumble through the night by accident. It organizes itself around it. People choose roles, accept trade-offs, and adapt their lives accordingly. The night is not a void between days. It's a fully inhabited space, with its own rules, economies, and communities. And once you see that, it becomes impossible to dismiss it as merely dangerous or marginal. In the final part, I want to pull back slightly and look at what all this nighttime labour does to the city over time. How it shapes laws, lighting, policing, and ultimately how London slowly tries to tame the dark without ever fully succeeding. Because the truth is, the city never completely conquers the night. It negotiates with it. By the time you reach the end of a long night in London, you start to understand why the city's relationship with darkness is never settled, only managed. Every generation inherits the same problem and answers it slightly differently. How do you keep a city functioning when half of its life happens out of sight? How do you make night safer without draining it of what makes it useful, profitable, or even necessary? London's solutions are always incremental, layered on top of habits that refuse to disappear. One of the most visible attempts to discipline the night comes through light itself. At first, it's hesitant. Private household lamps, then parish-mandated lanterns hung outside certain homes during winter months. Later, oil lamps installed along major streets. None of these transform the city overnight. They flicker, they fail, they're unevenly maintained. Some neighbourhoods glow, while others remain swallowed by shadow. And even where light exists, it doesn't banish darkness so much as reshape it. Pools of visibility surrounded by blackness. Safer corners, more dangerous edges. The night adapts immediately. So do the people who work within it. Policing follows a similar pattern. The watch is criticised, reformed, expanded, criticised again. New regulations promise order, but enforcement remains local, inconsistent, and deeply human. Londoners never fully trust the system to protect them, so they continue relying on personal networks, reputation, and caution. This skepticism becomes part of the city's character. Authority at night is always provisional. It works best when backed by community expectation rather than force alone. When that balance slips, the night pushes back. What's important to understand is that none of these changes eliminate night labour. They refine it. As lighting improves, some crimes decline, while others become more sophisticated. As streets grow safer, commerce stretches later. As policing tightens, informal economies shift location rather than vanish. The city doesn't replace its nocturnal systems. It folds them into new structures. Bakers still rise before dawn. Dockwork still runs by the tide. Care, cleaning, transport and security remain anchored to the hours most people avoid. Over time, the night begins to influence how London thinks about itself. The idea of a city that never sleeps doesn't emerge fully formed, but you can feel its roots here. Pride in endurance, admiration for resilience, a quiet respect for those who keep things running while others rest. Even as moralists continue to warn about the dangers of darkness, there's an unspoken acknowledgement that the city depends on it. Without night workers, London stalls. There's also a cultural memory being built. Songs, jokes, pamphlets, and later novels fill with nighttime scenes. The dark streets become a stage for drama, comedy, fear, and transformation. Night is where identities blur and stories turn. This isn't accidental. Londoners recognise that something essential happens after sunset, something truer, perhaps, than the polished routines of day. The city's imagination feeds on what it cannot fully control. What stays with me most, though, is how personal the night remains despite its scale. For all its size, London at night is experienced in fragments. A single street, a single shift, a single journey home. People remember nights, not eras. The night a fire nearly took the block. The night a deal changed everything. The night a stranger helped them when no one else would. These moments don't always leave records, but they shape lives. They ripple outward into decisions made in daylight. As modernity advances, the night doesn't disappear. It becomes brighter, louder, more regulated, but never fully tamed. Each new solution creates new problems. Each attempt to standardize the night leaves gaps where improvisation thrives. London learns to live with this tension. It stops trying to win and starts trying to balance. That balancing act is one of the city's defining skills. When I step back and look at it all, what I see is a city that understands, perhaps better than it admits, that its strength lies in continuity. London works because it never truly shuts down, because people are willing to inhabit the hours in between, because someone is always awake, always watching, always working. The night is not a failure of order, it's a parallel form of it. And that's why I keep returning to these stories. Because history doesn't only happen in daylight. Some of the most important labour, adaptation, and quiet courage happens when no one is meant to be looking. If you've stayed with me through this journey into London's working night, I appreciate it more than you know. This channel is built for people who want to see the city whole, shadows included. If you want more stories like this, stories that follow the city beyond the obvious landmarks and into the hours most histories skip, make sure you're subscribed and keep coming back. London always has another night to show us.